I knew that Jeff had already said hello before I even joined the call. I would just add that my role here is both a co-founder of the Digital Life Collective and also a certified warm data host, warm data lab host. So that's cool. And I just got enthused about the possibility of movements and how to allow movements to better cooperate, which has infected the work that everyone's involved here in the collective. And also then when I see everything that the IBI is trying to achieve, then that's got to be a movement, right? So I wanted to see if we could do interesting things together, see if we could cooperate and help make that happen, catalyze that, if I guess, for want of a better word. So may I suggest, unless anybody else has a different way of doing it, firstly, Nora, if you've got any further context you'd like to add to your setting, your stall out, then that would be lovely to hear in terms of your aspirations for the way in which the IBI's community can grow and be more than the sum of its parts and create the movement it needs to be in the world. And then after that, I can ask Joachim to kind of just give you an outline of the way in which we're trying to help movements like the IBI be more effective. Does that sound like does anybody else got a different agenda item or a suggestion? Speak now or forever hold your peace.
I'm just keen to see if you do some screen sharing. I'd love to see some of the platforms and stuff.
Oh, Joachim's middle name is actually screen share. That's his thing. If you asked not to, that would be more of a challenge, Phoebe. So, so Nora, over to you, please.
So, well, first of all, I should say that I'm kind of coming into this call out of the blue, so I'm not exactly prepared, but that's okay because this is what I eat, live, breathe, sleep, walk, and so on. And I guess for me, there's a couple of different things. One is warm data, and the other is warm data labs. So in terms of warm data, that's a whole sort of process of gathering information and sharing information and thinking about how transcontextual information can become part of what it is that's considered in this, sort of desperate appetite for solutions and urgency to address the global crises and personal crises that are being faced right now. In a way that really authentically addresses the complexity. So that's one sort of aspect, is kind of just bringing it into the societal vernacular of what it is we're talking about, so that when we're thinking about, how are we going to change the narrative of, this discussion that is everywhere right now, from climate to economics to culture change to gender to health issues to immigration and so on, that there's really nowhere close to the kind of warm data possible being used. So there's too much direct corrective analysis that doesn't include the peripheral and the indirect, and therefore doesn't really have access to that thing that we call warm data. And the other is that there's the warm data labs, and the warm data labs are so amazing. Actually, I just did a couple of them, and once again, I just have to shake my head. I just can't believe what happens. And I've been working with systems for a long time. I've done so many kind of group exercises and seminars with activities, and this is just of another order. And what happens is that the Warm Data Lab produces a shared experience that's absolutely individual, of a kind of interdependency that ranges from that which is in our conscious verbal knowing and that which is not. And it's, I don't know, it's kind of difficult maybe to understand that without having done it, but at least a few of you in the group have, so you know what I'm talking about. And in that sense, it has a potency that is sort of beyond the reach of any kind of explicit description. It's not like you go in and you teach these people this information. It's that you're with a group of people and you create the conditions in which they discover all kinds of linkings and connections that you know, honestly, no one thought they were going to discover. So my hope is, getting to your question, Philip, is that the process itself is already spanning so many different groups of people, from, you know, women in Asian Islamic communities to addiction facilities to the top level of Microsoft's AI community to people working in organizational development to the Finnish parliament to, right? So you're getting a sense that it's working through many different contextual processes. And what it does is it creates a group of people who are ready to develop action into a completely different order of action than has been there before. You know, we did one recently with a group of people who were working on addiction in Indonesia, and their way of coming through this was to recognize that instead of putting money into rehabs or into police force or into, you know, addiction research, that they were putting the money into the relational process of the community so that they could support across different contexts. And it sort of goes into this liminal space that right now, without a community that is in that space making demands in that space, there's no there, right? It's like this incredible invisible territory that we all actually occupy all day every day. And that's fascinating, but it needs community and it needs resources to be able to be activated. And so, you know, right now there's nowhere you can go to work in the liminal space on Monday and get a paycheck, for example, right? If you want to work between the institutions and organizations, that's a different thing than we're used to actually calibrating for in our questions of who, you know, what's your job, what's your profession, what are you educated for, what's your task, you know, all those questions are sort of the wrong questions for the work that has to get done right now, which is in the space between them. So that's what I would like to say, Philip, is that it's time to build this community kind of around the world so that there's enough demand and an increase of familiarity with that interdependency that it becomes logical and reasonable to want to create action in that way.
I'm converted. I'm there. I wonder, before we go to Joachim, whether anybody had any questions that dropped into your mind as you listened to Nora there. They're all converted too, Nora. I think. There you go. Lauren,
that, or they don't
please.
know what to say.
Can I ask you a question about warm data then?
Yeah.
How, after you have all of these conversations, how do you process all of the information?
Well, you know, it's an interesting thing because in a way you do and you don't. What you do is you keep the group together because the information is shared. and the holding, it's contextual. And so if you keep the group together, the continuance and the development of that information into action, if you will, is just a natural. It's just what happens. But if you try to jump too soon and you try to harvest that information, you get in trouble. And so that's with the warm data lab process. If you're generating warm data for a research project, that's another kind of thing. Okay, if you're generating warm data through warm data labs for, community work, it's different. I guess the other thing that I didn't mention is that one thing that we discovered recently, fully by accident, I got asked to do a warm data lab in Australia, and I went in to do it, and about 20 minutes into it, I realized something was really different in the room. And it turned out that that I was with 36 mental health patients with very severe diagnoses who were doing this warm data lab on health, actually, on what is health in a changing world. And they had diagnoses of everything from psychosis to schizophrenia, bipolar, and so on. And came out of that an hour later saying, this is the first time we haven't been invisible. This is the first time that anyone has taken the time to see how we see. This is where our insights are developed. This is how we get out of this. And so I hadn't really recognized formally that the process of the warm data lab was also a kind of had therapeutic properties. I knew that people felt different afterwards, but I didn't go so far as to say, it's therapeutic. I didn't go there, but I had also who would ever give me permission to have 36 mental health patients to do an experimental warm data lab with. Like, how the hell does that happen? So so it was really an accident, and it was an accident. Actually, those patients are writing about their experience because it was so profound for them. And so that's another whole piece, is that there's a way that insights are given a kind of petri dish to grow in the warm data lab process. And that is so for Microsoft execs, and it's also so for mental health patients. So it kind of ranges this span. Isn't that wild? So I think it's pretty amazing.
Thank you. That is astonishing. Didn't anyone tell you before you went into that session?
No.
Okay.
I had no idea.
Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, they thought I knew, and I had no idea, and I thought that everything was just, I mean, I noticed that it was a little weird, but I just thought it was just, I was in Australia, so
it's testament to the worldview that you could still roll it, and for it to be that kind of success. That's testament to the warmth of the process.
The pieces that they're writing are just stunning. I mean, what they're basically saying is, we're drowning in warm data and everyone thinks we're crazy. And you give us a warm data lab and we can make the space for the insights to be coherent and be how we get out of that. But it was the first time they said, this is the first time anyone has left the shore to come and meet us where we're swimming.
Oh, man. Right. Well, I hate to say it to you, Joachim, but follow that, mate. I'm conscious of time because it's 35 minutes past the hour, or 25 to, depending on how you want to put it. So perhaps the best thing to do now is to explain how we are trying to live up to portion of that vision in the way we want to cohere people with this new digital fabric.
We're building a boat to go out there.
We're building a boat, yes, to leave the shore. I like that. Over to you, mate.
Thank you, Philip. Thank you, Nora, for sharing that experience with the WED Data Lab. I'm having goosebumps here. I think Colin just typed it in too here. Really incredible. All right, so let me share my screen here. And I notice you're on a mobile screen there, Nora. I'm not sure how much you can see of that. Yeah.
It's kind of coming and going, but I'm here.
Okay.
There's a recording of this.
It's all very small. There we go. I can zoom in.
Yes.
All right.
Are we recording this? Just a quick check.
Well, the first time around it's recorded. I think it's recording.
Yes,
it is recording.
It's recording.
Excellent. Okay, so you can watch it later, Nora, on a bigger screen if you can't see else here. All right. So I shared some of the diagrams earlier. I'm a very visual person. I like to express things in diagrams. I just want to pick one or two of these diagrams and then show you actually more of the ways we're working together here in the collective. Because I thought Phoebe was more, wanted to see some hands-on stuff, how we're actually doing that. So one of the visuals I wanted to show you here is our duality chart, our diagram that shows a little bit of the history where we're coming from. So this is the diagram here in the center with two pieces of it, right? So one is called nurturing here, the other one is cooperating. So we have, our foundation is really based on this notion of technology we trust, right? So this is everything to do with the identity issues, inclusiveness, digital platforms, digital currencies, and all the other subtopics that come along with that, security, encryption, and all these topics that we're discussing heavily in the technology we trust area. So these challenges are out there, right? And we keep nurturing them inside the collective. But more recently, what we've done is we looked at the other side of this, which is how do we actually cooperate in these spaces? So make use of some of these technologies that we know they are positive, they're good, they're supportive, they enable co-creation, and apply that inside the collective, but increasingly as what we call cooperation as a service. Offer that for other groups, other organizations, other collectives out there to make use of these things and apply that to, say, their projects, to their own small organization or whatever they have going, and sort of pull them into this, and you mentioned liminal spaces. I love that. So this is also kind of a liminal zone here that we're creating for people to experience, really experience firsthand what does it mean to work with these new tools here, and what kind of new protocols can we develop inside this sort of protected space. It's very important for us to have that as a safe zone. This is not an open Facebook group here where anybody can join. We do want to make sure we have our members and we know who we're connecting to and getting to know them. So building these relationships is really at the core of the Digital Life Collective, but also preserving who you are as an entity, right? So we just, Christina mentioned this beautiful picture of a boat, right? So we're a boat here. We're inviting people to join this journey, but keep your identity, right? So you are your own group, you have your own protected space inside this boat, and you can move along with the others, right? So this is the only chart I wanted to show you, maybe one more later, but for now, let me just switch to something what we call the Digital Life Portal. So the portal is kind of an entry point, a way station, as John Calvin loves to call these things, into what we do at the collective. So as a new member, you can explore things and dive into what we do. And I show you the part of it now that's around the Digital Life Collective. What we're planning to do with other organizations is give them their own portal, their own set of services that they use in their own context. So you can see this as an application of this is Dig Life, yes, but there could be the IBI, there could be a Team Human, in their own space, in their own context, and build their own tool sets. So I'll show you just a few tools that we've been developing here. One way is, how do we see this organization? We want to, of course, move away from the hierarchical top-down notion of this is an org chart, right, towards something that I call a holonic map here, where you can actually see the organization, see the activities, as a growing and expanding and contracting organic thing, right, where people get actively involved in certain areas, Like I'm zooming into the main area here, and you can see interest groups, for example, developing here. And I can zoom into that and see, okay, there's a group talking about AI. There's another group talking about digital currencies, right? Here's knowledge management. I've been involved with that a lot. So these topics of interest that are happening inside the Dig Life Collective, right? Again, this is not the boundary of Dig Life here. And you can zoom in and out and dive into these conversations. So here's operations. Give you another example. Here's technology upkeep. There's a group that talks about the governance and self-organization. And if I want to, I can click on any of these and then dive into now the level of conversation that is happening there, right inside that circle that you just saw. And I can see this is the typical sort of conversation space, chat space environment. Just like you probably know, Slack, for example, is one example of these tool sets that are appearing now. But we're using another one called Mattermost here. And important for us is this is a tool that we own, we put on our server. It's open source software, right? So we can control, what the access is to that space, and it's not a third party that's involved here. Like Slack, for example, there will be a company involved as a gatekeeper into that kind of data that we're collecting. Here, more the idea is we're also collecting data, but we wanted to create sort of a way of circling that data back to the members, right? So talking about members, let me zoom out of this chart here for a moment and show you another one that dives deeper into sort of the relationships among the members, right? So here's a typical network mapping chart.
I recognize. Is this Kumu as a plugin? No. No. Looks very similar. Cool.
Yeah, this is D3. That's a JavaScript library that creates these visualizations for you. And what we've been doing here is sort of beginning to connect the members and establish seeing the relationships. So this whole visualization of who's out there, who's participating, and what capacity is really at the core of the Digital Collective here. And you can see that here if I hover over, where am I? Here's my avatar. So we're sharing some of these skill sets that we have in this example. I can click on mine. I can see a list of skills that I added and that I can maintain over time, right? So I can say, yes, I'm doing some stuff with the social ledger, social collaboration, but I could add another one. I can see what other tags are available in the collective, right? And see if there are any matches. So I may want to jump into some other conversations that are happening because of my skill sets, right? Or because I'm connected to other people in the collective here that have overlapping skill sets, right? So you begin to weave us more and more and see who's doing what. And notice one thing here I wanted to point out is the dotted lines. These are new members. So here's Will, joined 9 days ago. And we have Colin on the call here. At the bottom here is Colin, joined 16 days ago. And you can see his skill sets there, right? And then you can begin to make the connections to others with the similar skill sets and then start a conversation, right? See what they're doing, where they're active in the collective, and start weaving more and more of these activities, right? So that's one way. And you notice there's also a lot of members out here. They have signed up, yes, but they haven't shared their skill sets yet. So that's the typical distribution you see in any community, right? So we call this, that's the 1990 distribution of 1% is highly active, they're there all the time. You have the 9%, they show up, they sign up, but you don't see them again. And then the 90%, the lurkers, right? The people who sit in the background and don't do much, but they do learn. They do jump in from time to time and want to see what's going on. So that's this view on the members here we're providing. And then there are other ways of looking at the different data sets we're creating. Here's a card-based view. And I very much like what John Calvin is doing with his card sets and method cards and using cards to kind of get into sort of play spaces, liminal play spaces, where you can begin to rearrange these things and put them on boards, put them on maps, and begin to understand these interactions. So that's one thing we're doing with this kind of interface here, right? Where you can dive into, here are the channels listed that you just saw in Mattermost, and you can decide, okay, I want to dive into that. I want to join the group. And see actually who's here, right? Who's already inside the group. recognize that and participate, right? So it's very much, one aspect of this is sort of the open participatory inquiry here. So allow members to jump into these conversations and have a say in the decision-making process that is happening across the collective. I don't know if you've looked at the presentation that Philip had sent you earlier. There was one part of that talks about governance as a service. So how do you implement a governance system in an open environment like this? And that's one of the many things we're exploring here at the collective, to come up with sort of an open participatory process that allows people who are involved in the activity to participate in the decision making of that, right? It's not that everybody's involved in everything, because then you're back to the same conundrum of, okay, I need a central group somewhere, right? I need a board that makes a decision for everyone else. This one here, you want to keep this as organic and dynamic as possible by saying, let's push these decisions out to the edges, right? Push it into the circle that's currently dealing with, for example, here's public engagement, building a new website for the collective, right? So they're making most of the decisions. If there's anything important, like if there's a payment page or is a page that describes our mission and vision, then push that to others in the collective, right? So that bubbles up and becomes part of the governance process and the active participation of other members in the collective. So
just to be clear, the IBI wouldn't need to understand anything about how the collective is governed or functions or whatever. It's that this tool could actually show the conversations going on in IBI, and the teams can be, however that team chooses to be. And the portal allows even private teams, which are usually completely invisible in the chat type spaces, and you have to be invited, you can then actually see a card and ask to join.
Christina, your voice, for me, it lost internet halfway through.
So yeah, me too.
It cut out a bit of what you said. It felt important.
Sorry. Joachim, you know what I'm going to say? Yeah?
Yeah.
Fill in?
Yeah, I can continue that. Right. So what you see here basically is a snapshot of the Digital Life Collective, but you can have your own snapshot here of your own sort of circles or channels that you create in that's necessary for your team. Let me give you one example here. So back in Mattermost, you see on the left side here are these what we call domains, right? So these are all the Digital Life domains here, but we have others too, right? Here's some work from Michael Linton. He has a group. We have the ecosystem maps. We have open learning. We have groups that have their own spaces, right? So this could be something like your own space that you then create and use for the tool sets you use, right? And by tool sets, let me give you one more slide. And actually, Jeff didn't see that.
Could I ask a question?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
So on that homepage with the circles, like the bubbles showing the different conversations happening, can you customize that for yourself? Like, let's say this is Phoebe, let's say this is Phoebe's window, or is this the IBI window? Like, do you know what I mean? Would Phoebe have like IBI, Capricorn, Inspiral, and I'd see those all? Or is it kind of like you log in and this is the IBI window?
That's a really good idea. Put it on the feature list, Joachim.
well, in a way it is there, because Phoebe, this is kind of a reflection of the work you do inside your domain, right? So if you have your own domain, let's say ecosystem maps here is IBI, right? What you see inside IBI is only your activity, right? So you might have a circle for creating Kumu maps here as an example, right? So that would pop up here. You dive into that, you can go deeper, and then this is your channel for Kumu maps, right? And you would develop and have conversations here, pull in other things like running.
That doesn't. I feel like there's a question which is like, that? Do you understand, Christina?
I do. So Joachim, Phoebe is interested in community wrangling for the IBI, but also for the Capra Institute and Spiral, like a whole bunch of others. She, as an individual, might want to pull a portal together that shows her collectives her groups.
Right. And I thought
this is not possible right now. This is definitely a feature that we can talk about.
Cool. And my question was more that I'm wondering whether when you log on to that, whether it's like Phoebe or Nora user page or whether it's the IBI user page. So I'm judging from what you're saying, it would be the IBI or the Capricorn. So it's like, is it the organization or is it the person?
The graph one would be the holonic circles is the organization, but can you show her the slider so she can see in any specific context her personalized channels? Although you don't turn any off because you're in them all.
Right. Yeah, so this is one thing. If you have engaged in a bunch of different groups here, that's one way to say, show me only those where I am active or I'm the owner of this, right? So now you see a similar screen because I'm involved in all of them, but you would see a subset of this, right? So maybe 10 cards you're working with. That's the 10 channels you're engaged with.
Otherwise, it shows you all channels that exist at all.
That's right.
So I would see all of these because, well, like me or Nora making a new profile on here would see all of these and IBI ones, correct?
So for your depends all on the context, right? If you have the IBI in here, then you would see all of the IBI activities.
Okay, got it.
The screen listed, right? And you can then say, okay, how open is that channel to everyone else in the collective? Right?
Yeah, so this is a bit like the Slack channels, except that Slack only has private or open. So there's a bit more nuance here.
Maybe. Yeah, a bit more nuance and I would say more context because you can go up and down here, right? You can say this is grouping of the interest channels we have inside the IBI. And then that's part of the overall IBI, which is affiliated with another organization that might also be part of this, right? So this is very much in terms of, it's not so much about your work specifically, but more what you do across these groups, right? This cross-fertilization is a very important aspect of what we're building here. So
it would be super helpful to give some examples, like within the IBI, to just put color to what we're seeing. So it's like, this could be, let's say, would these be such like working groups? Like we might have London, Warm Data Labs, Microsoft, I don't know, like Nora, Ask Me Anything, who knows? Like, so these are like they're almost like little rooms where you can have just like little separate forums with different themes.
Yep, exactly. You're already thinking in terms of what else do we need to build here to make this work for others. Here, let me show you one chart here. I'll give you an overview of the different elements I call for the 21st century CAS. So CAS stands for Corporation as a Service, right? So
yeah,
that's
just a quick time check. It's 8 minutes to the top of the hour, so just a quick time check. That would be good. If you can spend 4, and then we can have 4 to work out next steps, that would be awesome, mate. Cheers.
Okay.
No pressure.
Sorry to ask lots of questions. Keen to just see as much as we can in 4 minutes, basically.
So very quick on this chart, it gives you an overview of the different elements we're looking at. And this is purposefully designed not to be an org chart or include traditional elements. So this is where you see something like conversational elements, psychological elements, and on the bottom here, socioeconomic elements, cultural elements, rhizomatic elements. So these are bits and pieces that we're putting together, make them part of what this 21st century CAS is about, right? One thing John Carter likes to talk about, programmable chats. So moving chats into more of a space where you can include some of the machine aspects, bots taking care of some of the routine aspects of the conversations, or calls and cognition. This is where you can have Zoom conversations and then also include tools in that conversation to say, who hasn't talked a lot, has everyone had a chance to talk? What were the topics we were talking about? So enhancing, really enhancing these kind of conversations that are happening in these spaces. And that goes on and on. You saw the maps and the holons is one tool to play on the organizational elements, and we're looking at protocols and actions and the decision flows that I mentioned earlier. So I'll stop here. I just wanted to wind back, come back to this screen one more time, where you see other functions here, like the typical things you see in these conversation communities, show calendar things, the folder stuff where stuff is organized. Here's a view on the different sort of notepads that we're creating to begin to assemble these protocols, share these protocols again with others in the collective, and work on them on real time, right? So if I open any of these here, and then I can directly go in here and make some edits, but not only myself, but it's a co-creative effort, and that's really important for us to say, you're not sitting here on your own. This is not a productivity enhancement tool. This is a co-creative kind of a maker space, right? You invite other people into that space, we give you the tool sets, and you build this stuff together with others. That's at the crux, at the core of what we're doing with Digital Life Collective, and increasingly more for these corporation as a service tool sets.
I just wanted to ask whether maybe we could just extend the call 10 minutes, because it feels like really important that we, like, I'm sure Nora has a bunch of questions, and I mean, maybe there's just some subset of people that could stay on a little longer if we want that.
Yeah, I can do that.
Nora, are you up for that?
Yeah, I'm up for that.
Cool, because we've got all this like shared context and, you know, shared time zones, so it feels a shame to cut it short.
Cool, thank you. So the meta level I like about this is it's not just cooperation as a service, but it's cooperating on developing cooperation as a service and cross-fertilizing communities that are working on different but complementary things based on shared values. So this is not a here's a free piece of software, can you see if you can host it yourself? This is not, hi, we're Slack, can you give us $80 a year, please, per person? This is us dog fooding it based on our own values to try and bring this digital fabric to work for us rather than have us work for it. So I wonder if we have any questions from our guests about what they've seen so far and what they'd like to see that we haven't had time yet to go through. Any questions, Nora, Phoebe?
Yeah, I have questions, but I'm not quite sure how to even frame them. So I might need some time to think about that, because I have kind of two different approaches of things that need to happen here. And one of them is, are you familiar with the term of metalog? Do you know what a metalog is?
No.
Okay, well, it's a cool word. I think it was a word that my dad coined. And a metalog is basically a communication in which the form of the communication is in alignment and expands the point of the conversation or the point of the communication. And so it's a beautiful thing. And if you ever
You're breaking up.
Steps to an ecology of mind, the beginning of them and the conversation. Oh,
you're back.
Okay, I'll change rooms. So anyway, I think that if I was going to be, there's different things. One is that the people who are working in these processes and in all these warm data labs around the world need to be able to be in communication and to be able to share information and, you know, all kinds of stuff in some way that isn't just an email thread. Because as we can see from what we've been doing, that's not really working. So it would be much better if it was a sort of a landscape where we were able to interact instead of a thread of communiques, right? So in that sense, I feel like I get where you're going. But then there's this other thing that I'm curious about, which is how do we create communication tools that generate and are not in any way destructive to warm data itself in the process. So I developed, and this could be something that it would be interesting to play with you as a group. I developed something that's something that I do sometimes with organizations and groups of people that I'm working with. It's a process that's called mapping somathacy, and I don't know if any of you have read, there's an article that I wrote on this idea of somathacy. I know Philip has, that is roaming around the world, and it has to do with looking at living systems as contexts of mutual learning. And so how do you map that? And really it's sort of pushing on the whole sort of way in which we think about what a map is. So I think that it would be really interesting to play with that process with you guys a little bit. Because I think what I'm seeing with what you have right now, it totally works for the first thing of kind of having a space where their conditions are there for lots of communication across different contexts, that many people can come in from different directions and do things. But there's still a lot of fragmentation and compartmentalization and siloing going on there. So, and I understand why. Because there's a need for the kind of clarity that identifies and keeps things discrete from each other. But what might that look like at the sort of next level, where that discretion is actually an expression of interdependency and that sort of the somathacy process at work? That's what I'm thinking.
Mm-hmm. This is what we've talked about in the collective. Is my voice coming through?
Yep.
Mm-hmm. As a socio-technical stack. So you can't just build software and have it work. Some communities will use Slack and destroy it, and some communities will use Slack incredibly efficiently and effectively. And that's true with any software. And so really tying the social processes to the deployment of the software is what Joachim was just showing in those little kind of candy colored boxes of a whole set of things that, depending on what you're trying to do in your community, you could deploy modules that, like, we have an empathy protocol. We have, protocols that could come out of your community that could be then generative for other communities. And so there's not a separation between the process and deployment and use of a tool and the code and the tool itself.
Cool.
The other thing, let me add one more thing, Christina, which is we don't want to pull sort of these activities out of context, right? And then sort of sterilize them and say, here's the next thing, just take it off the shelf. We want to preserve these connections. And one of the projects I'm working on here at the Digital Life Collective is called the Social Ledger, where we actually recognize and record our interactions, not the transactions, the thing that happened later down the line, but the interactions that brought us together to create that thing that we wanted to create, right? And that's kind of, for me, sort of the warm data aspect of, yes, I've been there, I've done these kind of things here, I've established these relationships. Don't give them up, right? Don't shove them aside. They are part of this. When we move forward into going to sort of the next camp, right? From base camp to camp 1, let's preserve these connections and make sure that other people who also follow us later on, right? They have a chance to visit base camp and they understand what happened there, the decisions we've been making there, right? That kind of data is essential to their understanding and sense making, that we can bring that up to a later camp 1 up here, right? And share it from there. So that's an important aspect for me too here.
In a stigmergic sort of way, Joachim, right?
That's a good word. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, it's this battle of making sure that digital just doesn't bring its ones and zeros to a social collection, but actually works for us rather than gets us to think in binary, let's leave Europe or let's stay. Reducing everything down to a binary function, that's exactly what we're trying to get away from here. We're trying to understand where the nuance lies and the context, and find some way to capture it. It's a work in progress, but at least it's a work in progress here, unlike some of the
absolutely. And I love that, Philip. I'm so happy to see that. I think, here's one thing that just occurred to me, and maybe this is useful, I don't know, is that what it's easy to do is to design contexts that we perceive as being connected, okay? But the actual issue is that there are all these connections that we haven't seen and we don't know. So how do we create a design that allows for connections that were unforeseen?
That's to me the difference between the social ledger layer, which is emergent and isn't the connections are never designed, they just happen and they're reflected. It's like a reflection, literally. And the mapping, which is much more like strategic sense making, how do we explore a problem space together or a landscape together? And that allows you, one of the most important parts of any map in my mind is the white space, being able to see what's not there and see like, gosh, this thing I know is really important, but I can't see why. And allowing you to sort of know what unknown makes the most sense to explore together next. But the social ledger file that we're with and is, in my mind anyway, as it gets built out, would be that reflection of emergent connections without any design imposed on it.
Yeah, it's sort of naming the emergent elephants in the room, realizing them, finding what's there.
Phoebe?
I just feel like I'm trying to grab a hold of some vines to swing from, like in the jungle. Like I feel like I'm kind of just looking for something to like. I feel like I've lost the vines, so I'm falling in the sky a little bit. So
there's the partner delegate space. We could create a IBI channel in the partner space. Joachim, do you want to talk about what conversation would need to happen next before there's a team where they can just kind of iterate a bunch of channels within that and explore?
Yeah, that would be great to hear. And I guess the other thing I'd want to ask is like, just to get a holistic view, what is it that, because originally when we talked with Philip, he was saying that you basically had a platform that like pulled in like Lumio and Mattermost and just like all of these different tools, and it seemed really mega. But then what I'm seeing here is more like quite like a custom built Slack, like I guess this is Mattermost. So maybe you're only showing
Mattermost is the Slack, but the portal allows you to put all your tools in one place. Okay, and so you put your link to Lumio, and then Lumio shows up in the one place. Wow. And you can do that within the Dig Life portal, but we can also talk about what it would take to sort of white label that the IBI.
Yeah, it was just a bit dodgy with the internet, but I think what you were saying is white label it with the IBI. I mean, that sounds amazing as a platform for communities that already use like a lot of these tools. And I think it sounds amazing. And there's a level of decision making to make with the IBI, which is like, are we at that point yet? Would it be cool to start with just the Mattermost and then maybe like, iteration 2, 6 months later, 12 months later, whatever it is, add a little bit more. And, I have a lot of familiarity with Lumio and some of these other tools. So I think Lumio would be like a bit soon. Like, I think right now, basically the community wants to connect, and Nora, like, feel free to chime in. But I think I would just say we need something that gets us off email. So like basic first step.
Yeah, I for sure. And I think it would be fun to play with it and see, what happens.
Yeah, like a little experiment with a small group of us. That'd be fun.
I think that would be really fun. And then I think we'd have more coherent questions.
That's simple.
But this arc is really important, knowing how we want to start and how different communities, different organizations want to go through that arc. And at some point, we will definitely have different communities participating, some of whom are very embryonic in their own form, but also embryonic in their own use of the digital tools that we can help them out with. And then there'll be very sophisticated entities, dare I say it, and Spiral, who know how they work as a DNA, as a social entity, and no doubt they will actually be so sophisticated users that they won't be users, they'll be helping to define and shape it so that they can leave their trail behind for others to follow and pick up on. This is not, what I think about it anyway, this is not a definitive roadmap of features. This is understanding how socio-technical communities and socio-technical movements work and supporting that growth through good thinking, deliberately, but also through this emergence of learning from the participants, learning from, lest anyone think otherwise, this is a journey rather than a destination per se, but what a wonderful journey.
And Phoebe, we could start out just in our partners domain. You'd see all the tiles. Mattermost has an extra layer to Slack, so you can have multiple teams within a single server. So you would then be able to, the small delegate group who joins the collective as individuals and sets up in our partner domain would have the main collective tile just for announcements, the partner domain for partner support, and then once we add an IBI tile or the Capra course crew tile or in Spiral or whatever else, you would have that along your side. And but we're looking at pricing structures that make sense so that anybody who is a warm data facilitator doesn't have to get confused with the brand of the Digital Life Collective and can't stumble accidentally into the other members only spaces. So, but what that does is it leaves a trail in the partners domain so that other people who come in, other groups, as the use of the collective they can come and explore, and that warm data or IBI channel can actually showcase your work for an audience that is aligned with what we're doing in the collective as well. So you kind of leave it there as a trail, and then one or two people, keep an eye on it. If people wander in from the other parts of the collective, then that you're findable there.
Cool. Nora's jumping off.
Thanks very much for your time, Nora. Lovely to catch up with you, and we'll arrange next steps now and ping you by email.
Fantastic. And much warmth to all of you, and thanks for all your attention to this, and look forward to talking soon. Bye-bye.
Have a great evening. Bye.
Yeah, you too. Bye-bye.
On that note, then...
Jump off. I feel like I should stay just for the next steps.
Just do the next steps, I guess. So Jeff and Phoebe, I feel like I've got a foot in both camps, so I'll shut up. But as IBI representatives, what would you like the next steps to be?
I'd like to see the setup so that a few of us can play with it and see if it'll work.
Phoebe's already a member of the collective, so I've just sent her the invite to the new chat. Okay. Jeff, if you sign up as a collective member, $10 a year, that gives you a welcome email. If you don't get the welcome email, let us know.
The $10 a year, I'd rather not pay until we know what's going on. But like I said before, I think what we need to do for the IBI is just to see if we can
just to be clear, Jeff,
have the IBI pay for it for the people.
Yeah, just to be clear, the $10 a month should cover the server costs. There's no salaries.
$10 a year.
Yeah,
Did I say a year? Sorry, I meant a month. I meant a year. There are no salaries.
You're just trying to skim some money for yourself, right?
Right. Classic.
This is we're incorporated as a cooperative. I don't think I'm going to IPO this anytime soon.
And what you just said is just like the contradicted what they said earlier before you came in late.
Is that what they said?
We could set up a test one to see what people think about.
Right, okay. So just in terms of
nevertheless, I mean, it needs
half a dozen people or something like that, you mean?
We need just like 3 or 4 people to try it out and see if it's going to fit.
Yeah.
So I propose Joachim and Philip jump in if this is too early, but we can just make a tile, and then I can send an invite so that they're not in the collective member only spaces. They're just in that, or we could use the partner space.
Yeah, I don't want to get in the way here. I'm just trying to explain to Jeff where the $10 a year came from.
Yeah, no, I understand where that goes. Yeah,
cool.
I think
do we start in the partner space, or do we create an IBI tile?
I mean, since we would like to have a channel in the partner space anyway for later on, right? Let's start there, and then quickly, once you're familiar with that tool and environment, we can expand that to a tile. So leave that option open, definitely to follow up with that once you're more familiar with the tool.
Okay.
Do you have like a starter pack or like a this is what you need to know? These, like, just even having a list of all the different tools that are pluggable into your platform. Like, do you have a kind of onboarding document or something that maybe you could send through? Or I would love to have a follow-up conversation with one of you, like one-on-one, because I think I've got a lot of like technical back and forth kind of boring questions, which I feel like I could do on behalf of maybe Nora and IBI so that I can kind of understand the tech, and then, or I mean, Philip, obviously you understand the tech too, but I feel like somehow it would be helpful.
I think if you and Joachim had a conversation and I took notes, that would be really generative.
Cool. Let's do that. Let's schedule that.
When works for you?
Well, what about, do you do weekends, or you stay off weekends?
I try not to.
Okay, let's do, if you're free on Friday afternoon.
Yeah, well, afternoon where?
Okay, afternoon. I was imagining that would be good for you in the US.
In which time zone?
I'm in the Pacific.
UK. London.
Yeah. So you're 4 p.m.?
Yeah, that would be great.
Does that work for you, Joachim?
Thanks, Colin.
Perfect.
Cool.
So 11 East Coast.
Awesome.
This Friday, yeah.
Yeah, and if you have invited me to a thing, I'll make sure that I've logged onto it and had a look beforehand.
I will send that. And the sign up link, Jeff, that I just put in the chat, if you click on that and set up an account, that should add you just to the partners team. And Phoebe, you won't need to do that. Just do the one I sent to your email. And then you'll have the main Dig Life for announcements and the partners chat as well.
Cool.
And I can,
cool.
I'll set up a couple spaces and you'll just see it when you, as soon as I see you, I'll just wait until you're there. And then as soon as I see you pop up, I will set up the spaces.
Pounce. If you want to, sorry.
I'm the internet kitten.
I'm in the jungle. I'm like in the jungle for this call. Would you be able to send a Zoom call invite, or should I do that?
No, I've got it. It's on my calendar. I just need to go get my Zoom link.
Awesome. Okay, I'm going to jump off.
Great.
Brilliant.
Thank you so much, team.
Take care.
Awesome.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Okay, so it's 8 o'clock Friday, right?
Yeah, Jeff, will you give me your email?
Yeah, hold on a second.
In the chat? That's great. And you have that link? Do you copy paste that link?
Yeah, I copy it. Yeah, but that's the one thing I don't like about Zoom. Once you disconnect.
Yeah.
Whatever's in the chat disappears.